20, 10, 5. Torrey Horton back to the end zone.
48-yard play. Guess who? Body up the middle, making another move to the outside. 15, 10, end zone again.
Keeps it. Nice move by Brown. He's got space. He's got 6. 35-yard touchdown for Byron Brown. A record-setting night for the South Florida quarterback.
Down so far, a little bit of a high snap. Genty right up the middle. Genty has room. Ashton Genty, give him 6.
Second and long. Lagar tries to pin it in. Ramos, it does. Ramos stays up. The Suns offense 4-3 wins. Incredible effort for Ramos.
The G5 Hive. All G5, all the time.
Welcome to the G5 Hive Live. We are excited to bring you the G5 college football coverage you love each and every week. I am Luke, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justice. Well, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching us on X, please give us a follow, a like, and a retweet. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. And don't forget, the G5 Hive merchandise source is now live. The link is in the YouTube video comments as well as pinned on our X page. There at the bottom of the screen. If
here we go.
Find it.
There we go.
All right. It is right there.
Yeah, that's the best way to support us. Number one, like if you're watching right now, if you're on YouTube, hit that like button. Like the more likes we can get, the more the algorithm likes it, the more faces we can get in front of. If you're not a subscriber yet on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're pretty close to 500. I think we're sitting at like 475. So if you're not a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. And lastly, if you want some sweet merchandise, visit the link at the bottom, buy some merchandise. And that's the best way you can support the work we're doing. Now we're going to get into our Week 10 waiver wires, the waiver wire honey for this week, and Luke's going to take it away with the quarterbacks.
Before we get into that, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching us on X, please give us a follow, a like, or retweet. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, stop what you're doing. Put us on pause. Go give us a rate and review now. All right, let's get into this waiver wire honey for quarterbacks. He's in the 2020 group. Jalen Kitna, UAB, 1% owned. This group here is guys that I feel comfortable going and grabbing. They're throwing the ball all over. I talked about him earlier. Jalen Kitna, a guy to own going forward. Owen McCowan, 25% owned. He too is a 2020 guy. He's slinging around. Attempts the last 5 games, 50, 43, 45, 50, and 37. His last 4 games, his lowest fantasy output has been 31.2 points. Colton Joseph, ODU, 25% owned. He's a dual threat. In 4 of his last 5 games, he has 30-plus fantasy points. And he gets you anywhere between 42 and 111 rushing yards during that time, too. So they've got a bye this week, right, Justice?
Yes.
So you'd have to hold on to him. Parker Navarro, Ohio, 15%. He's been a little bit up and down. Again, it's been those turnovers and benching. They've got Kent State, so I like his opportunities. He's had 80-plus rushing yards in 3 of his last 4. Like I said, Kent State, Week 11, fire him up. Spencer Petras, Utah State, 19% owned. Again, a 2020 guy. There's no Royals, there's no Brock Lane, but I expect Spencer Petras to be able to throw the ball around. They're going to need to play catch up. So that's 1, 2, 3 guys on here that are 2020 guys. They're just out there on your waiver wires. These guys that we're looking for that are 30% owned or less. Other guys that I don't hate and I would be okay with, Hunter Watson, Sam Houston, 8% owned. They've got a bye this week, but he's a dual threat, should be back after the bye. If you need 25-ish fantasy points, he's your guy. He's going to run the ball. He's going to do most of his damage on the ground, but he can throw the ball pretty well. Keaton Hauser is probably my favorite of this list. East Carolina, 8% since he's taken over the last 2 weeks. He's had fantasy outputs of 43.55 and 39.4 and 8 passing touchdowns over that time. Cole Snyder, Eastern Michigan, 9% owned. He's got a good floor, 20-plus points in his last 5 games. In his last 3, he has 31.75, 31.2, and 43.8, and 9 passing touchdowns in those 3 games. So he's not a bad name to pick up. Keon Jennings, FIU, 10% owned, in bye in week 11. But Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, and Middle Tennessee to end the year. He's coming off a 43.6-point game. He's been up and down, but I like that schedule to end the year. And then Cam Fancher, FAU, 5% owned. I kind of like what the Owls are doing here towards the end of the year. I think they're starting to figure it out just a little bit. I was looking for kind of rushing options here at quarterback. He has 15 attempts. No sack rushing attempts like included in that. So it's like just designed runs or whatever QB scrambles in each of the last 3 games. Averaging 49 rushing yards, again, no sacks. He's thrown for over 300 in 2 of those 3 games with fantasy outputs of 23.6, 22.4, and 42.45 points. So, again, Cam Fancher, a name to watch out for. Justice, what do you got at running backs?
All right. The first running back is Javon Jackson, UTEP, 26%, 20-plus carries in the last 3, 148, 112, 83 yards. He kind of lost his job, and then he got the job back, and he's been producing pretty strong. And then they have Kennesaw State this week, so look for Javon Jackson to continue his hot streak. Next up, running back Elijah Gilliam, Fresno State, 18% owned, 22.8, 28, 19.8, 13.2 points in the last 4 games. And they have Air Force coming up this week. Again, he's taking over from Malik Sherrod while Malik Sherrod is out. Look for that to continue. Jaquez Cross, Arkansas State, 21%, last 4 games, 6.7, 33.1, 22.5, and 12.7 points. They had a bye this past week. They played Louisiana this week. Elijah Young, Western Kentucky. As Luke mentioned when we talked about Western Kentucky earlier, they've been running the ball more effectively as of late. He has 22.8 points, 15.4 points in his last 2 games, and they have a juicy matchup for Elijah this week against New Mexico State. The last of this group is Al-Jay Henderson, Buffalo, 3%. Last 4 weeks, 15.8, 22.6, 13.5, 21.9 points. He's had 142, 97, 81, and 107 rush yards. He's been coming, Buffalo tends to share the ball, take more of a committee approach, but Al-Jay Henderson's been coming on really strong as of late. They do, however, have a bye this week. This next group got George Pettaway, James Madison, 23% owned. They were on a bye this past week. For the previous 4 weeks, he's had touches of 16, 16, 17, and 20. He only has 2 touchdowns over that time, but he scored 10.7, 16.8, 11.1, and 23.3 points. Again, a great matchup for him this week against Georgia State. Next, Florida Chalk, San Jose State, 25% owned. His last 5 have been 21.4, 17.7, 13.1, 15.1, 8.9. You've seen double-digit carries in those matches. 6 rushing touchdowns over that stretch. And they match up against Oregon this week. Eli Sanders, New Mexico, 8%, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns this week. He had a monster game this week with the 205 yards, 2 touchdowns for New Mexico against Wyoming. They played San Diego State this week. The last 2 I want to mention are teammates. And I only mention them both because they have both been producing the last several weeks. Troy, with the lack of quarterback play, with no Goose Crowder, they have kind of molded this offense to be a run-first offense. They rely heavily on Gerald Green and Damian Taylor. Gerald Green is 1% owned. His last 2 games, 113 yards, 123 yards, 18.9 points, 33.6 points, respectively. They do, however, have a bye this week. Damian Taylor in his last 2 games, 70 yards and 190 yards rushing, 12.6 points, 25 points. Again, a bye this week, but these 2 guys are going to be relied upon heavily moving forward for that Troy Trojans offense. All right, let's go back to Luke and the wide receivers.
All right. Chase Sewell, ECU, 20% owned last 2 weeks before the bye, 20-plus points in each of those. Hauser has taken over. Stock up for Chase Sewell. Orion Singleton, Eastern Michigan, 9% owned, 15-plus points in 5 of his last 7, 19.2 and 19.7 in back-to-back weeks, 18 receptions, 200 yards in those last 2 games. Junior Vandeross, Toledo, 26% owned, great floor, averaging 15.9 points per game, 10-plus targets in each of his last 4 games. Fantasy outputs in those games, 15.4, 13.4, 22.2, and 16. Justice's Offensive Player of the Week, Eric Rivers, FIU, 28% owned. I assume we will not be talking about him next week.
Yeah, I doubt it.
More consistent than Patterson. Double digits in all games this season except for week 1 against Indiana. Just had 58.5 points this last week, 11 receptions for 295 yards and 3 touchdowns. Adrian Norton, Akron, 14% owned. Other than week 1, Adrian Norton has scored double-digit fantasy point outputs in every contest. He just put up 27.8 last week versus Buffalo. He's on a bye this week. The thing that holds Adrian Norton back is the touchdown upside, because they've got this 2-quarterback system where it's like between the 20s, they have Finley, and then they switch quarterbacks to a more mobile quarterback kind of inside the red zone in 20s, which then takes away Norton's upside. So he's got to score a long touchdown or between the 20s type throw. Omari Hayes, FAU, 11% owned. He has seen 25 targets over his last 3 games. That's 25.8% target share. I may need to remind you that he missed their matchup with UTSA due to an injury. In those 3 contests, Omari has no game under 5 receptions or 70 yards receiving. He's averaging 6 receptions for 99 yards over that 3-game stretch. The Owls have a date with ECU on Thursday. ECU had a bye this last week, but they did allow 2 Temple wide receivers to have over 80 yards and a touchdown each prior to that. Ashton Allen and Landon Morris combined for 9 receptions, 190 yards receiving, and 3 touchdowns. So while the Owls are finding touchdown success on the ground and not so much in the air, I believe Omari Hayes will be able to put up a respectable receiving stat line for you. Now, do you get that touchdown or not? Matt Sykes, Rice, 7% owned, 14-plus points in 5 of his last 6 games. He had 23.3 points against Navy this last week. UTSA just threw the ball all over Memphis. Can Rice do the same? If so, I like Matt Sykes. And then we talked about him last week, but Justin Lockhart, San Jose State, 12% owned, number 2 wide receiver in an offense that throws it a lot. He's had 11-plus points in all but 1 game this year, week 2 against Air Force. Don't blame you. It's Air Force. Jaden Smith, Nevada, 20% owned. His targets per week the last 3 games, 8, 12, and 12. Double digits in 70% of his games this season. And in those 3 games that he's seen those targets of 8, 12, and 12, he's had fantasy outputs of 12.5, 11.4, and 22.4. And to round out my waiver wire honey for wide receivers is Luke Floria, Kent State, 16% owned. He's got a bye this week, but he has 14-plus points in 3 of his last
Yeah, they're not on a bye. They play Ohio this week.
Sorry. Yes, they play Ohio this week. Sorry. Yep.
All right. Moving over to the tight ends. Number one on the list, Dorian Fleming, Georgia State, 28% owned. He is a 2020 guy. We're not going to spend too much time on him. John Michael Gillenborg, Wyoming, 27% owned. He did have his the new QB this week, Caden Anderson, and he had 5 targets, 4 catches, 38 yards, and a touchdown. He did get banged up, but they are on a bye this week, so look for him to come back strong in 2 weeks. Pat Conroy, Old Dominion, 18% owned. He's very up and down, but I will say he is one of Colton Joseph's favorite targets. He's had 5 targets each in the last 2 weeks, but they are on a bye this week before playing JMU in 2 weeks. We talked about him last week. Hopefully you listened to us. Houston Thomas, UTSA, 5% owned. This past week he had 6 targets. He caught all 6, 44 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Back-to-back big weeks for Houston Thomas. He is on a bye this week, but I expect him to be a popular ad in leagues that require tight ends. Hopefully you listened to us last week and added him before he really went off this past week. And then rounding out the tight ends, Taylor Thompson, James Madison, 28%. The last 5 games, targets of 7, 9, 3, 5, and 3, with his points of 20.1, 10.9, 13.8, 4.6, and 9.5 over that stretch. He has an average depth of target of 11.5. They did have a bye this past week, but they have a nice matchup this week with Georgia State. And that is going to do it for our Week 10 waiver wire honey.
All right. That's going to do it for the show this week. Come back to join us next week as we discuss what happened in Week 11, as well as look forward to Week 12 of the 2024 season. And as always, bring you up to date on all the latest news and happenings in the world of G5 college football. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching us on X, please give us a retweet, a like, and a follow. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe and leave those 5-star ratings and review. Thank you all for your support. Until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Hot dog, hot dog, hot dog,